Hello, welcome back. This is Zach at Zach Moves Abroad, and today I'm talking about the things that I miss from the UK. As you know, I've lived abroad for 9 months now. I moved abroad back in October of 2025. It's now June, almost July of 2026, and I spent 5 of those months in the UK. So I went October through January in the UK in various places, and then January and February in Spain, then March and April back in the UK, May in Crete, and then now I've been back in Spain for a month. And we fell in love with the UK while we were there. And there are a variety of things that we miss about being in the UK, having spent the vast majority of our 9 month or time abroad, not the vast majority now, but the majority of our time abroad in the UK. And here are some of those things, because it is a very unique society with things that they are doing differently than anywhere else that I've experienced in the world. So one of the big ones is the British queue. And I don't think Brits realize how special this concept is. Not just because the actual queue itself, like, yes, sure, the concept of actually lining up in a neat, orderly fashion is pretty special, because the first time I experienced it in a way that actually was meaningful is I was lining up at a bus stop. And what I realized, because I'm a very aware person who grew up in a city, and I always am aware of my surroundings to make sure that, I'm being safe and I have my wits about me and I'm not going to be robbed, was that everybody was clocking everybody else around them. Like, subtly, I watched everybody notice everybody else. And I didn't know what was going on when this was happening. But I noticed that it was happening, and I was being very aware of it because I wanted to make sure I wasn't going to get robbed. Because I was in London, and everybody's like, "You're going to get robbed in London. Hold on to your phone. It's bad, knife crime." And nothing bad happened to us in London, by the way. London, my number one favorite city in the world. Had a great time. We were safe. We had a fiesta every single day of our lives there. I wish I could go back and live there. I had a great time. Anyway, but then when the bus arrived, as it was pulling up, everybody looked to one another and they lined up in the order at which they arrived at the bus stop. Let that sink in for a second. They lined up in order at which they arrived at the bus stop. So when they were clocking one another, they were assessing who had arrived in which order. If you're American and your brain is twirling right now, you're not alone. Because I was American and people were making room for my family in the order at which we had arrived. My wheels still spin at this concept, because I'm like, well, what do you mean? And everybody was like, your spot is right here. You arrived after James, but before Sally. You stand here with your family. And don't worry, we're going to make space for your kids once you get on the bus. And everybody knew that was true. And this is a microcosm for how British society functions. So if you've never been to Britain, the UK, England, Scotland, I've never been to Northern Ireland, but I've been to Wales. Everyone understands this as a fundamental truth. Everywhere we've been, Wales, Scotland, England, everybody did the same thing. They noted who had arrived at that time, and then they lined up in order, and the order in which they were received. And then when you got on the bus, if you had children or were elderly or otherwise visibly disabled, you were given priority access to seating, period. There was no discussion. People with headphones, people who looked like they would be hoodlums or otherwise, disrespectful, and I don't mean that as in they were disrespectful, because they weren't, would stand up. Like, people who would be associated with gangs in the United States just got up and gave people their seats, because that's what they do in the UK. Crazy. Also, whenever you would run into a queue out in public, aside from pubs, they were always orderly. Everybody stood exactly where they were supposed to. Like, they knew that it was supposed to run along the wall so that you would leave room for people to walk by. Don't get me wrong, it's not like queues are a complete mess in the United States. Sometimes they are, but there's times where you're like, Why aren't people understanding that there needs to be a walkway here in order for people to be able to pass in this queue? Whereas that discussion never happened in the UK. We would line up for, like, I don't know, a jacket potato, or during Christmas markets, we'd be getting in line for our crumble or whatever, and everybody knew what time it was. The queue goes this way. And some people would ask, like, Ultimo, or, what is the question? I don't know what the question actually was, but they'd ask, is this where the end of the queue is? And then they'd pop right behind you. And then they would make sure that there was a gap for people to walk through if they were near a pathway. And there was never anybody trying to nick a spot in the queue, jump the queue, because they knew they would be amazing. If anyone ever tells you that there's like I've never heard anybody say anything about British like culture being uncivilized, but if they do, just slap them. You can pull off your invisible glove and just smack them in the face because they're lying to you. I don't like being lied to. I don't think you like being lied to, and they are lying to you because it is the antithesis of uncivilized. It is peak civilization. Anyway, and this trickles down into my second thing, tea culture. I didn't realize what tea culture represents, but this is another one of those things that is less about the specific act of drinking tea and more about what tea represents. The tea break isn't about sitting down and drinking a cuppa. Yes, it is. But a well-prepared cuppa means more to these people than just a caffeine break. I drink coffee for a means to an end. Frankly, I needed it to function, to tolerate my children at certain times, to get through the day. Now, I'm not saying people don't use, Yorkshire, their cup of Yorkshire practically, and I'm not saying, a builder's brew isn't to, like, get through a hard day of work. But it's more about taking a break, having a moment to appreciate what's happening in the day, taking a moment to let your food digest, having a moment to chat with a friend, appreciating life. It's like toning down the urgency in civilization. The thing about American society is that if you're not being productive, you're considered worthless by your company, by your boss, by some of your peers. And this is one of the biggest fallacies of how our society is structured. I have no idea how we got to this moment. I don't fault the American people who are currently running things. I fault the government who, forced like that urgency on us during wartime many, many moons ago. This probably happened, a couple of decades ago during, World War II and Vietnam War era, and that like hyper efficiency just never went away, especially when we were developing, into the economic powerhouse that we are today. But because of that, it's all about squeezing every tiny little bit of efficiency out of us in every single moment, rather than taking a minute to stop and smell the flowers. Take a hydration break, take a sip of tea. And the tea break and having a cuppa is so important to the people of the UK that it actually means more than just that. It is spending time with people around you, spending a moment, taking a second. And then also, actually, tea is amazing. So it's not always as caffeinated as a full cup of black coffee. Even though black tea, don't get me wrong, don't overdo it. I overdid it the first 2 weeks I was there. I did not sleep. Don't do that. But you can sip on it throughout the day. You can have 3 or 4 cups and still be able to function properly. And I think that there's something really sacred about that. The third thing is politeness. Even if manners don't matter to you, and I'm not saying they don't, I'm not saying they should, but even if they don't, there's something about the efficient use of sorry, please, and thank you in the UK that will really get you far. Use them yourself, but also hearing them used to you makes you feel like you matter a little bit more, makes you feel like you have purpose a little bit more, makes you feel like you're doing things in the right way. And when you feel like you are doing things properly, it makes you feel like you're functioning as a part of something. one of the things that's unfortunate reality about American culture is that there's an individualistic element in it of American society that's no surprise to anybody. I'm not giving anybody a piece of information they don't already know, but that individualism, that American individualism, can sometimes make you feel very alone and lonely, and you also don't feel like you owe anybody anything, and so you'll hear a lot of "can I have" or "can I get" or "give me a" or "Kai have." They don't even get the full "can I have." They just say "Kai have a," and it comes off very brash, very harsh, not very polite, and I don't like hearing it. I can imagine Brits don't like hearing it, but it also is. It's a way to have that independence by way of assertiveness. And when you think about it, that's not a very, that doesn't have a very collectivism mentality. Whereas please, thank you, when everybody's doing it, sorry when I bump into you, sorry when you bump into me, there's an appreciation for your fellow man that's built into their society, fellow woman, fellow person, sorry, just, fellow people, that is the backbone of how their society functions, and you cannot beat that. I don't want this video to get very long. I actually have 3 other points, but I'm going to wrap it up because I really want this to be a sub 15-minute video because my videos get very verbose. But the last one that I will point out is, it is the safest place I have ever been. I feel so incredibly safe in the UK. I spent more time in England than I did the other places, so I'll speak to that more specifically, but you can talk all you want about the rising of X, Y, and Z BS thing that you see on the news media, but when you go outside and start interacting with people and spend time in reality instead of online or in whatever, fantasy land that the media wants you to believe, if you go out and interact with people, they are some of the warmest, friendliest, non-threatening people on the planet. Sure, if you go to the scariest parts of the biggest cities, guess what you're going to find? Dangerous situations. But if you don't go to those hyper dangerous situations, guess what you're going to find? Amazing, welcoming, wonderful people who are going to be friendly to you and have your back. And what we found the entire time when we were there, not in the scariest parts of town, amazing, wonderful, fantastic people. Even in the places where they told us we were guaranteed to find the worst underbelly people. When we went to Kent, they were like, don't go to Kent. It's scary. They're not going to like people like you. We had no trouble whatsoever. We had nothing but the warmest welcome. They literally rolled out the red carpet. Not literally, but they effectively did, because people are fantastic everywhere we went. We drove all over England, and we had the warmest reception from complete strangers. People would just stop in the street to talk to us. They'd let us pet their dog. They'd they'd effectively invite us over. We never really took people up on that, not because we didn't want to, just it never really worked out in the way that we had hoped, but it's not that we wouldn't. If we had lived there, I think we would be way more neighborly in that regard. But we had strangers just pick up our kids and help them all the time. Random hooligans, like soccer hooligans with open beers, picked up my kids and put them onto a train because they needed help. Not because we asked them to, but because they needed help and it was the right thing to do. I don't know, man. Anyway, all that to say, we missed the UK. We loved it there. We're probably going to make a visit here soon. Stay tuned if you're a fan of ours for a big announcement. Not a huge announcement, but a big enough announcement. So if you like this type of content, give me a subscription, subscribe to the channel. Follow me on all my socials, pretty much at Zach Moves Abroad on Instagram, TikTok, Facebook, and the like, and I'll see you in the next one.